Cracks form among Senate Democrats as Trump threatens big shutdown layoffs, by Alexander Bolton. Cracks are starting to form in the Senate Democratic caucus over whether to hold the line against a 7-week clean government funding stopgap passed by the House, according to Democratic sources, who say that a threat by President Trump to lay off thousands of federal workers is changing the Democratic political calculus on a shutdown. Senate Democratic leader Chuck Schumer, New York, who faces a potential primary challenge from Representative Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, Democrat New York, in 2028, has made it clear he will not vote for the House-passed GOP stopgap, but centrists in his caucus are looking for a way to avoid a catastrophic shutdown. Senator Jeanne Shaheen, Democrat from New Hampshire, who plans to retire from the Senate at the end of 2026, has been putting out feelers to Republican senators about reaching some sort of deal or mutual understanding to avoid a government shutdown next week, according to a source familiar with her conversations with Senate colleagues. Shaheen told Semaphore in an interview Wednesday that she sees a number of ways to avoid a government shutdown that should satisfy both sides and open the door to voting for the House-passed stopgap next week when Senate Majority Leader John Thune R.S.D. brings it back to the Senate floor. "I am not going to draw a line in the sand and say it has got to be this way or that way," she said. Democratic sources familiar with internal caucus discussions say there are a handful of Democratic senators who want to avoid a government shutdown, even though they have little room to maneuver given the hard line drawn by Schumer and House Democratic leader Hakeem Jeffries N. Why against the House-passed continuing resolution? Senate Democratic sources say Trump's threat to use the shutdown as a justification to order agencies to fire federal employees working for programs that are not consistent with the president's priorities raises tough questions about whether it is worth triggering a shutdown to put pressure on Republican leaders to make concessions on health care spending. Schumer on Wednesday dismissed a memo from the White House Budget Office directing agencies to use a shutdown as an opportunity to consider reduction in force RIF notices as something that would be overturned by the courts. This is nothing new and has nothing to do with funding the government. Their unnecessary firings will either be overturned in court or the administration will end up hiring the workers back, just like they did as recently as today, Schumer said in a statement late Wednesday. But Democrats who are wavering over Schumer's pleas to hold the line against the Republican funding bill are worried about how the Supreme Court, which has a 6-3 conservative majority and a recent history of handing down rulings in Trump's favor, will ultimately come down on the issue. Only a small number of the hundreds of lawsuits filed against the Trump administration have reached the Supreme Court, which on Monday cleared the way for Trump to fire Rebecca Slaughter, the leader of the Federal Trade Commission. The court signaled that it would reconsider a nearly century-old precedent-limiting executive power over independent agencies. A Senate GOP aide confirmed that bipartisan talks are underway outside the Democratic leadership to find a way to pass a clean, short-term funding bill before October 1st. There is a small handful of intelligent Democrats who do not want to see the government shut down and are working behind the scenes, the source said. "I know Democrats have spoken with Republicans," the aide added, emphasizing that GOP leadership is not prepared to give away any significant concessions at this point. At least 8 centrist or retiring Democratic senators need to break with Schumer to pass the funding stopgap. That is a tall order given Schumer's firm grip on the caucus since taking over as leader in 2017. Republicans control 53 seats, but Senator Rand Paul, Republican Kentucky, an outspoken fiscal conservative, says he will oppose the GOP funding measure because he says it prolongs Biden-era spending levels. Senator Lisa Murkowski, Republican from Alaska, voted against the House GOP-drafted stopgap funding bill last week and has expressed concern about the expiration of enhanced health insurance premium subsidies at the end of this year, something the House bill failed to address. Murkowski, however, would likely vote for a clean continuing resolution if it has more bipartisan support and a good chance of passing the Senate. Schumer and Senator Brian Schatz of Hawaii, the Democrats' chief deputy whip, have said definitively that they will not vote for the clean House GOP-drafted stopgap funding the government through November 21. 8 other Senate Democrats who voted for the 6-month House GOP continuing resolution in March are still in play. They include Senator John Fetterman, Pennsylvania, who was the only Senate Democrat to vote last week for the House-passed continuing resolution. That measure failed on the Senate floor by a vote of 44 to 48. Other potential yes votes include retiring Democrats who voted for the March stopgap, such as Senate Democratic Whip Dick Durbin-Ill. and Senator Gary Peters, Michigan. Durbin voted against the House-passed continuing resolution last week and urged Trump to negotiate with Schumer and Jeffries, but he did not rule out voting for a funding measure before the deadline. Senator Catherine Cortez Masto de Nevada has not yet said how she would vote if the GOP funding measure comes back to the floor on Tuesday. Shaheen's home state colleague, Senator Maggie Hassan DNH and Sens. Kirsten Gillibrand DNY and Angus King Independent from Maine, who all voted for the March CR, are also in the mix.